Right now, as you're listening to this, more than 160 million people across the United States are living under some kind of active weather alert. Not next week, not hypothetically, right now. Some of them are watching the sky turn a strange shade of green, wondering if the wind about to hit their house is going to be the kind that just rattles the windows or the kind that takes the roof. Others aren't watching the sky at all. They're watching a thermometer. In a house with the air conditioning cranked as high as it will go, hoping it's enough, because in the last several weeks, H-heat alone has already killed more people in this country than most tornado outbreaks do in an entire year. And underneath both of those threats, in a wide band running from the plains into the Ohio Valley, rain is falling hard enough, fast enough, that streets are turning into rivers before anyone gets a warning on their phone. This is not a story about one dramatic storm. It's something more unsettling than that, because it's three separate hazards stacking on top of each other in the same week across overlapping parts of the country. Extreme heat, damaging thunderstorm winds, and flash flooding, and understanding why that combination is actually more dangerous than a single headline grabbing outbreak is the whole point of what you're about to hear. Let's start with the heat, because it's the one hazard in this story that's already killed people, and it doesn't get nearly the attention it deserves. As of the first week of August 2026, there have already been at least 70 confirmed deaths tied to the extended heat wave gripping large parts of North America. 70. Not from a tornado, not from a hurricane, not from lightning. From heat. This particular heat wave didn't come out of nowhere either. It started as a heat dome parked over the eastern United States and eastern Canada in late June, the kind of setup where a stubborn zone of high pressure traps hot air underneath it like a lid on a pot, letting temperatures build day after day with almost no relief. By early July, a second heat dome formed over the western half of the continent. Phoenix hit 113 degrees. Salt Lake City set a new all-time record high at 109. And through it all, the humidity made things even worse. During one stretch in Louisiana, the heat index, which measures what the temperature actually feels like to the human body once humidity is factored in, hit 121 degrees. That's not a number most people ever expect to hear applied to where they live. That's a number that can put a healthy adult in the hospital in under an hour if they're working or exercising outside. And here's the part that should genuinely concern you. This heat wave never really left. As of this week, in early to mid-August, extreme heat warnings are active across a wide stretch of the country. Parts of southeast Kansas and central, southwest, and west central Missouri are under an extreme heat warning with heat index values climbing as high as 108 degrees. Illinois and Missouri together have widespread heat advisories, with heat index readings hitting 105 in some counties. Meanwhile, out west, Las Vegas, Denver, and Albuquerque are all expected to hit the triple digits. In areas of Missouri, Kansas and Oklahoma are baking in the high 90s, with Oklahoma City potentially crossing 100 degrees as well. On the East Coast, even as humidity has eased slightly in cities like Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Philadelphia, temperatures are still sitting in the 90s, kind of about 4 to 8 degrees above what's normal for this time of year, with heat index values in the nation's capital making it feel like a full 100 degrees. Why does this matter so much beyond the discomfort of it? Because heat is what meteorologists and public health officials call a silent killer, and they use that phrase deliberately. A tornado announces itself. Sirens go off. Skies turn dark and strange. People instinctively know to take cover. Heat does none of that. It doesn't interrupt your day with a warning tone on your phone that feels urgent enough to change your plans. It just quietly raises your core body temperature hour after hour, especially if you're older. Especially if you have an existing health condition, especially if you don't have reliable access to air conditioning, especially if you're working outside, because that's simply what your job requires. Heat exhaustion can turn into heat stroke with very little outward warning, and heat stroke can be fatal within a matter of hours if it isn't treated. That's the quiet, grinding danger sitting underneath everything else happening in the atmosphere this week. Not a single dramatic moment, but a sustained, exhausting, and genuinely lethal condition that's already claimed dozens of lives and shows no sign of fully breaking. Now layer the second hazard on top of that heat. Severe thunderstorms, specifically the kind built to produce damaging straight-line winds. As of the most recent outlooks from the National Weather Service's Storm Prediction Center, a slight risk of severe thunderstorms has been posted across portions of the Midwest, with damaging winds identified as the primary threat, alongside additional strong to severe storm potentials stretching from western Nebraska into the Dakotas and even into parts of Arizona. If you're picturing a slow-moving line of scattered storms, picture something different. The setup meteorologists are watching is one where individual thunderstorm clusters can grow and organize into what's called a mesoscale convective system. Essentially, a large, self-sustaining cluster of thunderstorms capable of producing a long, bowed-out line of intense wind, sometimes referred to as a bow echo, that can race across hundreds of miles in a single night. This matters because straight-line wind damage often gets underestimated by people who assume the only truly dangerous wind event is a tornado. It isn't. A severe thunderstorm, by definition, only needs to produce one of three things to earn that classification: hail at least an inch in diameter, wind gusts of 58 miles per hour or stronger, or a tornado. Notice that a tornado isn't required at all. Wind alone, at 58 miles an hour or higher, is enough to snap tree limbs, tip over high-profile vehicles, rip off roofing, and knock out power to tens of thousands of homes in a matter of minutes. And when these systems intensify further, gusts can climb well beyond that threshold. Some of the more extreme, fast-moving complexes on record have produced wind gusts approaching or exceeding hurricane force, cutting a swath of damage that, from the air, can look eerily similar to a tornado's path, except stretched out over a much longer, straighter line. The Storm Prediction Center's outlook right now specifically calls out this Midwest wind threat as the headline concern, with additional storms capable of large hail expected to develop farther west as the evening progresses, encountering richer low-level moisture and increasing atmospheric instability as they track east-southeast. In plain terms, that means the ingredients, heat, humidity, and a disturbance in the upper atmosphere to trigger lift, are lining up in a way that's expected to keep firing off rounds of strong to severe thunderstorms for multiple consecutive days, not just tonight. And this is where the third hazard comes in, the one that's arguably the most underappreciated of all three: flash flooding. The Weather Prediction Center has flagged a slight risk of excessive rainfall for portions of the upper Midwest, with an initial wave of convection already pushing through Iowa and Wisconsin, producing rainfall rates between 1 and 2 inches per hour in a primary convective cluster over southern Wisconsin. That rate matters enormously. An inch or two of rain falling steadily over the course of a day is manageable for most drainage systems. An inch or two of rain falling in 60 minutes is a completely different story. That's the kind of rate that overwhelms storm drains, turns low-lying roads into fast-moving water in a matter of minutes, and catches drivers off guard, specifically because it can happen after dark, on a road they've driven 100 times before with no visible warning until their tires are already off the pavement. The broader forecast discussion makes clear this isn't a one-night event either. Forecasters are describing a multi-day heavy rainfall threat, extending from parts of the Midwest into the Ohio Valley through the rest of this week, with a progressive and unsettled weather pattern across the northern and eastern United States expected to persist through at least the early part of next weekend. At the same time, a ridge of high pressure building over the south-central United States is expected to keep hazardous heat locked in across the south and southern plains through Saturday. So while one part of the country deals with the risk of storms training repeatedly over the same saturated ground, another part continues to bake under a heat dome that refuses to budge. Here's why the combination of these three hazards deserves to be taken seriously, even without a single dramatic tornado outbreak attached to it. Flash flooding is, statistically, one of the deadliest weather hazards in the entire country, year after year, precisely because people underestimate moving water. 6 inches of fast-moving floodwater can knock an adult off their feet. 12 inches can carry away a small car. 2 feet of moving water can carry away almost any vehicle, including large trucks and SUVs. And yet, every single year, a significant portion of flood deaths in the United States happen because someone drove around a barricade or misjudged how deep a flooded road actually was in the dark. Combine that with a severe wind threat capable of downing trees onto roads and power lines in the same general region, and you get a set of conditions where emergency responders can be stretched thin, responding to wind damage in one area while flash flooding cuts off roads in another, all while a heat wave in the background is separately filling hospitals with heat-related illness. None of this is being described this way to manufacture panic where none is warranted. Quite the opposite. The honest, accurate picture is this. Right now, there is no confirmed large-scale tornado outbreak forecast for the days immediately ahead. That specific dramatic scenario simply isn't what the atmosphere is set up to produce this week. What's actually unfolding is arguably more insidious, precisely because it doesn't look like the kind of single cinematic disaster people are trained by news coverage to watch for. It's an overlapping, multi-hazard stretch of extreme weather, heat that's already proven lethal, wind events capable of significant damage across wide areas, and flash flooding that can turn an ordinary evening commute into a life-threatening situation with almost no warning. To understand how forecasters communicate a threat like this, it helps to understand how the Storm Prediction Center's risk categories actually work, because there's a lot of confusion around them. The scale runs from marginal to slight, to enhanced, to moderate, and finally to high. A common misconception is that these categories describe how severe the storms will be. They don't. They describe the probability and coverage of severe weather occurring within 25 miles of any given point on the map. A marginal risk means isolated severe thunderstorms are possible, limited in duration or coverage. A slight risk, which is what's currently posted for parts of the Midwest, means scattered severe thunderstorms are possible, generally short-lived, though isolated intense storms can still occur within that zone. That distinction matters, because a slight risk area can still absolutely produce a thunderstorm capable of significant wind damage, large hail, or in some cases, even a brief tornado. The category tells you how widespread the threat is expected to be, not how mild any individual storm inside that zone might turn out to be. This is actually one of the most important things to understand about severe weather forecasting in general. A lower category risk day is not automatically a low danger day for the specific person standing directly underneath the one storm that does happen to intensify. Some of the most destructive individual storms in recorded history have occurred on days rated only slight or marginal, simply because atmospheric conditions were right for one or two storms to become unusually intense, even if the broader region wasn't expected to see widespread activity. That's part of why meteorologists constantly emphasize watching the forecast evolve hour by hour, rather than checking it once in the morning and assuming nothing has changed by evening. Looking slightly further out, the picture doesn't get simpler. Extended forecasts from the Climate Prediction Center are flagging a moderate risk of extreme heat returning to the southern plains, the lower Mississippi Valley, and the southeast for the period spanning roughly the 16th through the 18th of this month, driven by increased humidity and skill-weighted heat risk guidance that shows a meaningful probability of heat index values exceeding 105, and in some spots, 110 degrees. That same outlook flags a slight risk of extreme heat continuing across much of the south-central and southeastern United States for an extended stretch running from roughly the 16th through the 22nd. On top of that, forecasters are also watching for a rapid onset drought risk developing across portions of the southern and central plains and the lower Mississippi Valley, a consequence of persistent dryness combined with limited precipitation expected over the coming 2 weeks in that specific region, even as just to the north and east, repeated rounds of heavy rain threaten flash flooding. It's the kind of pattern that sounds almost contradictory until you understand how atmospheric ridges and troughs work. One part of the country locked under a dome of dry, sinking, superheated air, while a neighboring region deals with repeated waves of moisture-loaded storms rolling through one after another. So what does all of this actually mean for the average person trying to figure out whether they need to be worried this week? It means paying attention to more than one kind of alert. If you live anywhere from the central and northern plains through the Midwest and into the Ohio Valley, the immediate concern over the coming days is a combination of potential damaging thunderstorm winds and the risk of flash flooding, especially if you find yourself driving at night through an area experiencing heavy rain. If you're in the southern plains, the lower Mississippi Valley, or the southeast, the more immediate and arguably more dangerous concern is the heat itself, particularly given that this region is already dealing with an extended heat wave that has proven capable of taking lives, and given that an additional round of extreme heat is specifically being flagged for the middle of this month. For the severe thunderstorm and flash flood threat, a few basic pieces of guidance genuinely do save lives, and they're worth repeating because so many flood deaths happen from the same avoidable mistake. If you come across a flooded road, do not attempt to drive through it, even if it looks shallow, even if you've driven that exact road 100 times before without incident. Floodwater is frequently far deeper than it appears, and the road surface underneath it can already be washed out in ways you simply cannot see from inside a vehicle at night. It takes a surprisingly small amount of moving water to lift and carry a car, and it happens faster than most people expect. Turn around, find another route, and treat every flooded roadway as a hazard until proven otherwise, because emergency responders consistently report the same pattern year after year. It is overwhelmingly the vehicles that tried to cross that end up needing rescue, not the ones that turned back. For the wind threat, especially if you're in an area under a slight risk or higher for severe thunderstorms, it's worth treating a severe thunderstorm warning with the same seriousness most people already reserve for a tornado warning. Move away from windows. If you're outside, get inside a sturdy structure. If high winds are expected, secure or bring in loose outdoor furniture, trampolines, and anything else that could become airborne debris, because a significant portion of thunderstorm wind damage to homes and vehicles comes not from the wind itself acting on the structure, but from wind-driven debris that becomes a projectile at 50, 60, or 70 miles an hour. And for the heat, arguably the least dramatic and most dangerous of these three hazards, the guidance is almost deceptively simple. And yet, it's exactly the guidance that gets ignored most often, which is part of why the death toll keeps climbing. Drink water consistently throughout the day, well before you feel thirsty, because thirst is already a lagging indicator of dehydration. Stay in air-conditioned spaces as much as possible, and if you don't have reliable air conditioning at home, most cities operate public cooling centers specifically during heat events like this one, and using them isn't a last resort. It's a genuinely smart, proactive decision. If you have to be outside, whether for work or for anything else, try to shift the most physically demanding parts of that time to early morning or evening when temperatures are at their lowest point in the daily cycle. Wear lightweight, loose-fitting, breathable clothing. Check in on relatives, neighbors, and anyone elderly or living alone, because heat-related deaths disproportionately affect people who are isolated, without easy access to relief, and without someone nearby to notice when something starts to go wrong. And never, under any circumstances, leave a child or a pet unattended inside a parked vehicle, even for a few minutes. Car interiors during a heat wave like this one can reach genuinely lethal temperatures in a matter of minutes, far faster than most people intuitively expect. It's also worth understanding, in simple terms, what's actually driving a heat wave this stubborn, because it isn't random and it isn't just summer being summer. A heat dome forms when a large area of high pressure parks itself over a region and essentially traps warm air underneath it. The same way a lid traps steam over a pot of boiling water. Air trapped under that dome sinks, and as it sinks, it compresses and warms further while the high pressure itself tends to suppress cloud formation, which means more direct sunlight reaching the ground day after day with little relief overnight. That's part of why this particular heat wave has been so relentless. It isn't one hot afternoon, it's dome after dome. First parked over the eastern United States and eastern Canada in late June, then reforming over the western half of the continent in early July, each one locking a region into days or weeks of temperatures well above normal, with minimal overnight cooling to offer the body any real recovery. There's a secondary consequence of all this heat and dryness that's easy to overlook if you're not in the affected region: wildfire risk. Out in the northwest, elevated fire danger has continued alongside the hot, dry pattern, with major wildfires actively burning near Spokane, Washington, and around Mount Hood in Oregon. Smoke from wildfires burning across Canada has also drifted south at various points this summer, at times actually limiting how much the temperature could rise on a given day simply by blocking sunlight, a strange, almost backward silver lining, where one hazard temporarily dampens another, even as it introduces its own separate danger in the form of degraded air quality for anyone with asthma, heart conditions, or other respiratory vulnerabilities. It's a reminder that these hazards rarely exist in isolation. Heat, drought, wildfire, smoke, and severe thunderstorms are all connected pieces of the same broader atmospheric pattern, each one capable of making the others more dangerous, or in some cases, slightly less so, depending on how the pattern shifts from week to week. It also helps to put this in some historical perspective, because none of these individual hazards are new. What's notable is how persistently they've been overlapping this particular summer. Derecho-type wind events, the kind capable of producing a long, straight swath of severe damage stretching hundreds of miles, have happened before and will happen again. One such event in August 2023 produced 54 tornadoes across the Great Plains, the Midwest, and the eastern United States over the span of roughly 5 days, along with over 1,100,000 power outages and more than $1 billion in damage, even though that particular outbreak sequence resulted in only 2 direct fatalities, both non-tornadic. That's a useful data point in itself. An event that sounds, on paper, less dramatic than a headline tornado outbreak with dozens of deaths can still cause an enormous amount of disruption and financial damage, precisely because of how widespread the wind and flooding impacts end up being compared to the narrower, more concentrated path of a single, significant tornado. Flash flooding carries a similarly under-the-radar reputation, and for similar reasons, it rarely produces the kind of single, unforgettable image that a large tornado does, and yet, averaged across recent years, flooding consistently ranks among the very deadliest weather hazards in the United States, competing directly with heat for the top of that grim list year after year, specifically because both hazards are so easy for an individual to underestimate in the moment. A tornado forces an immediate, obvious decision: take shelter right now. Floodwater and extreme heat both tend to invite a much more dangerous kind of decision-making, the kind that sounds reasonable in the moment. I'll just drive through it. It doesn't look that deep. I'll just push through the yard work. I've done it in worse heat before. Those small, quiet miscalculations, repeated across millions of individual choices during weeks like this one, are exactly what turns an unglamorous multi-hazard weather pattern into one of the more dangerous stretches of the year, even without a single outbreak headline attached to it. There's a broader pattern worth pointing out here too, because it connects directly to why this particular stretch of weather deserves real attention rather than a shrug. Severe weather forecasters have noted that 2026 has already been an unusually active year for convective outlooks in parts of the country. One regional National Weather Service office in the Midwest reported an unusually high number of days rated enhanced risk or higher through the spring, well above the typical range of 4 to 8 such days they normally see over that same stretch of the calendar. At the same time, seasonal tornado forecasts for the year pointed toward something slightly different from the headline-grabbing outbreak seasons of the 2 years prior. Forecasters expected tornado counts closer to the historical average, while specifically warning that straight-line wind damage and flash flooding were likely to pose an even greater threat than tornadoes across many areas this year. In other words, what's unfolding across the country right now this week is very much in line with what meteorologists specifically flagged months in advance as the defining risk pattern of this particular season. Not necessarily fewer dangerous days, but a shift in which specific hazard is doing the most damage. That shift matters because it changes what people should actually be watching for. If your mental image of a dangerous severe weather event is built entirely around tornado outbreaks, funnel clouds, sirens, storm chasers on live television, you can end up dangerously unprepared for a week like this one, where the greater threat to your safety is a heat index climbing past 105 degrees, or a flooded intersection you can't see the bottom of, or a wind gust strong enough to drop a tree limb through your windshield while you're stopped at a red light. None of those scenarios come with the same dramatic visual language that tornadoes do. All 3 of them have killed people this year already. So where does that leave the honest answer to the question this story opened with? Is there a dangerous, severe weather threat unfolding right now? Yes, genuinely, but not in the specific shape a lot of people might expect. It isn't a single, sharply defined outbreak with a clear beginning and end. It's a layered, overlapping stretch of hazardous conditions, an extended heat wave that has already proven lethal and shows signs of intensifying again by the middle of the month. A multi-day severe thunderstorm threat capable of producing damaging straight-line winds and large hail across a wide stretch of the Midwest and plains, and a flash flood risk running underneath all of it in a region already softened up by repeated rounds of heavy rain. Individually, none of these 3 hazards necessarily makes for a single dramatic headline. Together, spread across the same general week and, in some cases, the same overlapping geography, they represent a genuinely elevated risk to anyone who assumes that because there's no tornado outbreak on the map, there's nothing to actually worry about. There's one more thing worth saying plainly, because it changes how you should actually think about a week like this one. Preparedness for this kind of layered, multi-hazard pattern doesn't look like a single dramatic action, the way sheltering from a tornado does. It looks like a handful of small, boring habits, repeated consistently for as long as the pattern lasts. Checking the forecast more than once a day, because these conditions are evolving hour by hour, not day by day. Keeping your phone's weather alerts turned on, rather than assuming you'll notice the sky changing in time. Having a plan for where you'd actually go if a flash flood watch turns into a warning while you're already out on the road. Knowing which of your family members or neighbors might be more vulnerable to the heat specifically, someone older, someone with a health condition, someone who works outside, and making a point of checking on them without waiting to be asked. None of that is exciting. None of it is the kind of preparation that makes for dramatic television, but it's exactly the kind of preparation that actually determines who gets through a week like this safely, and who ends up becoming one of the statistics buried in a summary report months from now. Because that's ultimately the through line connecting all 3 of these hazards, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Extreme heat, damaging straight-line wind, and flash flooding don't share a dramatic visual signature the way a tornado does. They don't interrupt a broadcast with a siren graphic and a countdown. They arrive quietly, they build gradually, and they kill just as effectively as the more cinematic disasters that tend to dominate the news cycle, arguably more effectively, in raw numbers, averaged across an ordinary year. The danger this week isn't hypothetical, and it isn't exaggerated. It's simply wearing a quieter disguise than most people are trained to recognize. That's really the core, uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire story. The most dangerous weather isn't always the kind that looks dangerous. It's not always the swirling funnel cloud on the horizon or the wall of green-black sky rolling in over the tree line. Sometimes the most dangerous weather is the kind that just sits there, day after day, quietly raising the stakes. A heat index that keeps climbing past the point your body can safely manage. A stretch of road that looks fine until your headlights catch the water moving faster than you realized. A thunderstorm that never produces a tornado at all, but still manages to drop a tree on a car with someone inside it. Real, immediate danger doesn't always announce itself with sirens. This week, across a huge swath of the country, it's showing up in exactly the way it's most likely to be underestimated. Not as one terrifying storm, but as 3 ordinary-sounding hazards, quietly stacked on top of each other, adding up to something that genuinely deserves your attention, whether or not it ever earns a dramatic name of its own.